Alright everybody, we're finally back to the much awaited second part to Aardvark's Lit Corner Less Than Zero review. I finally finished the book a couple days ago and I finally have a chance to sit down here and talk about it with you all here today. So, where to start? First of all, this took me way too long to read. I wanted to get this episode out way sooner, but without going too much into it, I've been between jobs, but finally I got a little free time now. Now, I do have a page of notes here to go over. As you can see, I don't have any of those fancy colored little tabs they put on top there. I'm just a rank amateur. There's no Crimson Rogue down here, no crazy booktube nonsense yet. I'm still getting the hang of things, but I do have a page of notes for you here today. I've got some thoughts on this book. I would say, overall, I enjoyed it. It's probably not my favorite Bret Easton Ellis novel, but it is very well written, and every time I go to Ellis, I'm always excited to get to the next novel, get to the next book. He's a really excellent writer. Postmodern. Let me just start with the general story. And real quick, I just want to say, it's not that there's parts that I don't like. I just want to say it gets very dark. It gets extremely dark. Towards the end, there's two instances, as a matter of fact, where and this is very rare. I mean, I can usually handle some really dark stuff. I guess the way my psyche is built, I can travel to some pretty dark places when it comes to media, when it comes to literature, when it comes to anything, and I can usually come out. I mean, I can always come out just fine. I mean, I'm sitting here in front of y'all right now, but there's two instances where I was in my car reading the book on my 15 or my lunch, what have you, and I'm like, there's two sections I don't even think I can talk about in this episode. We're gonna see. Maybe I'll get into it, maybe I won't. Stay tuned. But I had to close the book and say, okay, and just come back to it later. Anyway, story outline: Clay Easton, I believe. Because Clay is very obviously meant to be Bret Easton Ellis. He has to be pulling from his own experiences in LA in the early 80s, because I believe he was 18 or 19 when he actually wrote this novel. And Clay, the main character, he's 18, I believe, maybe 19 in this novel. He just got home from a university out in Camden, New Hampshire, I believe, where he's come back to his hometown, LA. He gets picked up by his girlfriend, Blair. There's a few characters. Blair, his drug dealer, his coke dealer. This is going to be demonetized. This is going to get like 20 views. I don't got to worry about demonetization. Anyway, so I can say coke, his coke dealer. As this is the early 80s, you might imagine, and this is pretty much the elite class of LA, Hollywood, that whole area. Bret Easton Ellis, he paints a very good landscape throughout this entire area, and I believe it comes up a lot in his novels, the greater LA / Mulholland, all those places. It gets to be a very, very dark place, and I hope that I never end up in LA, because, man, he definitely leans into the horror. Especially towards the end, there's almost a loathing, and I would almost say it starts to become a horror novel, where Clay's psyche is just breaking down over time. It's just breaking down throughout the novel, I would say, where there's almost like a chorus to the background of the novel where he keeps saying, he sees on the billboard, "Disappear here," and as I mentioned in my first review, he hangs on to the word, what was it? The opening line, how could I forget? The people are afraid to merge on the highways in Los Angeles. He hangs on to these words, and as dark stuff is unfolding around him, he will just dissociate. His character will completely dissociate, and it's almost like a time skip. He'll think something really bad will just be unfolding, and he'll just think, "Disappear here," time skip. blah blah blah. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let me get back into the characters. His family, they're bastards basically. I mean, his mom and dad are divorced, and his dad, I believe, is an extremely, what was it? He was I believe he builds hotels in the LA area. Blair, her dad, is connected in the film scene, like the LA film scene. I believe he's a big producer. And Clay's dad is, I believe he works on hotels. He manages hotels, works on them, whatever. He's very, very rich, has a huge office, big penthouse, blah blah blah, holidays and wherever, what have you. But he's essentially just completely removed from Clay's life, and they have absolutely no connection. He doesn't have any connection to his mother either. The only connection he had, and this begins to, there's a little background, there's something in the background that begins to unfold, where there's these, I mean, the book isn't split up into chapters, as you can see, I showed you. There's no numbered chapter breaks or any titles or anything. It just jumps from paragraph to paragraph with a capital letter. But there are these sections. Let me find one for you guys real quick. These sections here, they're in italics, and they're interspliced throughout the novel, and it's I believe it's just Clay's long-lost longing for the way things should be, because he longs for when he was a kid, and he had more of a connection to the people around him and the places around him. There's even a section later on where he goes to his old elementary school, and he's just walking through, longing and pining for the days where things were much more simple. His grandmother was around, where he was very fond of his grandmother, who died of cancer, I believe 5 years before the events of the novel take place. And he reminisces on these times in Palm Springs, on vacations with his grandmother, sitting by the pool, talking, having a good time. And even in these distant memories where he's longing for the past, and before he was addicted to coke and Valium, and there's sections where he has to rely on Valium to even sleep. He's supposed to be 18, so it's like, what's going on here, man? He's still essentially just a kid and completely burnt out already. I mean, his nose is about to collapse at this point. His navel cavity is about to collapse from all the cocaine usage. And then he finally has two younger sisters who, they're kind of funny. Early on, he scolds them for breaking into his room and stealing his coke. So they don't really have any serious relationship either. Yeah, here we go. I have it written right here, page 44. Page 44 is where it introduces the juxtaposition to the usual degeneracy it's been up to this point. And it's almost a completely different side of Clay of what we've seen up to this point. Before page 44, where we start getting the italicized paragraphs where he's longing for something of the old, it's just essentially scene of degeneracy. Clay goes to this party, does coke. Clay buys coke from his dealer. His dealer's name is Rip, as I mentioned, which is pretty funny. There's some strange character names, as you might imagine. And I have it written here that the side of Clay is nostalgic and heartfelt, like it very much is. And you really do feel for Clay as it goes along, because I really don't know if I have it in me to dive into some of the really brutal stuff that happens. And if you know anything about Bret Easton Ellis, he's no stranger to very brutal scenes. I mean, I believe his most infamous novel, American Psycho, at the time he wrote it, which was just a few years after he wrote this. At the time he wrote that, it was lauded as being very brutal, and I believe it was banned as well in some areas. And some of the sections in here are almost on par with American Psycho. I mean, it's crazy. And these things will happen around him, and current day Clay, it's not about like how he reacts, it's how he doesn't react. These things are just eating away at him, and he just wants to leave LA behind. But yeah, these italicized sections are actually honestly what actually sucked me into this book. I mean, if it wasn't here, then, and give me one sec. I have a very strange comparison to make, but one sec. I'll be right back. Here we go. Here it is. I want to make a comparison to something I read earlier this year. As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. Excuse me. As I Lay Dying is told through the perspective of like 20 different characters. Not even joking. It's something along. It's at least a dozen characters. But one of the main characters, Darrell. I'll say Darrell. I mean, it's D-A-R-L. You can say Darrell or Darrell. I'm gonna say Darrell. There's sections to his character that really stand out in the novel where he's essentially the main. I would say he's the main speaker. He's definitely the smartest of all the characters, and he'll have these sections in his he'll have these paragraphs in his sections where it's also written in italics, and it's almost like it's coming from something. It's almost like it's coming from somebody else. Like he's psychically projecting some insane nonsense. I thought it was a very apt comparison, because it stands out of place in As I Lay Dying, and it stands out of place in Bret Easton Ellis, Less Than Zero, in a good way, of course. It's out of place in a good way. It makes the entire novel stand out in the entire narrative, the way it unfolds. Which, something else that's really funny, page 22, I have it marked, where some very interesting synchronicity. Like I said, I read As I Lay Dying, just apropos of nothing. I didn't spin a wheel or anything. I just thought might as well dive into his bibliography, check him out. But page 22, one of the characters, Trent. Trent, I can go into him a bit later. He's one of Clay. Excuse me. He's one of Clay's friends in this novel, and as it goes on, Trent becomes. It becomes clear how corrupted Trent has become, and he's one of the characters that surrounds Clay that has absolutely no moral compass, and he's complicit in some really sick and depraved stuff. And I know I keep alluding to this, but I'll just say it relates to snuff films, okay? Because there's an event later in the book that relates to snuff films and, how do I say this? Child S abuse. Child S abuse. I don't know how else I can say it. Trent is complicit in both of these things, and outright, he's just a really sickening character, and it makes your skin crawl as you're reading through this book and seeing how these characters are just demented and corrupted and just completely annihilated. Their souls are completely annihilated, except Clay as well. I'll even argue. I'll say it doesn't have a good ending. All right, it definitely did not have the greatest ending. I sighed and I closed it. You're not going to be smiling after you read this, and if you are, then you might be part of the problem that the novel is talking about. Calcified souls and whatnot. Anyway, page 20. Anyway, as I'm trying to say, page 22. Trent, he gets out of his car and he pulls out the cliff notes for As I Lay Dying, the Faulkner novel that I just mentioned with the Darrell italicized sections. So I thought that was really funny. As I'm making this comparison, I'm like, wait a second, it came up earlier for no reason. I believe it's the only novel that's even mentioned, so clearly Bret read As I Lay Dying, and he must have enjoyed it, And there's actually a lot of some of my favorite stuff about Bret Easton Ellis's novels is that it'll incorporate a lot of things from the culture at the time. In the Rules of Attraction, for example, there's constantly just background music, and that's a weird way to describe it, but I don't know how else to describe it. He'll create an atmosphere, naming tracks that are playing. Like, one song that comes up over and over again in Less Than Zero, which is pretty funny at parties or just on the radio or whatever, is Duran Duran's "Hungry Like the Wolf," which is a pretty good bop, I'll say that. And it really does just create a nice little backdrop for where you're at. Reminds you of GTA Vice City almost. Alright, and I have it written in my notes as well. And this is getting to be the end of my notes. I stopped taking notes at around page 58, and there's 200 pages. So that goes to show how much of an analyzer I am. I'm still a rank amateur. Like I said, you're not gonna get any of those post-it notes. There's not gonna be a million post-it notes sticking out of my stuff. I have it written right here. I have it written that page 46 really tickles my fancy. I'm gonna see what that means. Give me one sec. Okay, I found it. It's a very comedic section where, oh no, he is driving himself. Sorry, he's driving and this car pulls up next to him. They roll down their window and they mistake Clay for a famous actor. Where Clay as a character is also described as very handsome. He's young, tan, blonde. He finally gets a tan, by the way. When for 50 pages it's mentioned that he needs to get a tan, he gets a tan. But this is really funny because it's this little section where he's driving and there's these two kids who mistake him for a famous actor, so they start pointing at him and calling him out, and then he speeds off and then gets stuck at a red light, and then the two guys are just still screaming, oh my god, it's him, and he stops at another red light. It just goes on like this for a paragraph, and he says, the light turns green and I drive away, but I'm in the left-hand lane and it's a Friday afternoon nearing 5, the traffic's bad, and when I come to another red light, the Fiat's next to me again, and these two insane F slurs, I guess you can say. This is YouTube, so I don't want to get banned. Insane British word for cigarettes are laughing and pointing and asking me the same effing question over and over. I finally make an illegal left turn and come to a side street where I park for a minute and turn the radio off, light a cigarette. He's constantly chain smoking as well. But I thought that was okay, yeah, no, that really tickles my fancy. These two insane fat. Okay, anyway, let me tell you guys about one of my favorite movies of all time, American Psycho. Page 58 of this novel. One page. I'm just gonna read it verbatim. I'm lying in Blair's bed. There are all these stuffed animals on the floor, and at the foot of the bed, when I roll over onto my back, I feel something hard and covered with fur, and I reach under myself, and it's this stuffed black cat. I drop it on the floor and then get up and take a shower. After I've toweled my hair dry, I wrap the towel around my waist and walk back into her room, start to dress. Blair smoking a cigarette and watching MTV, the sound turned low. Will you call me before Christmas? She asks. Maybe. I put on my vest, wondering why I even came here in the first place. You still got my number, don't you? She reaches for a pad and begins to write it down. Yeah, Blair, I've got your number. I'll get in touch. I button up my jeans and turn to leave. Clay? Yeah, Blair? Finally see you before Christmas. She stops. Have a good one. I look at her a moment. Hey, you too. She picks up the stuffed black cat and strokes its head. I step out the door and start to close it. Clay? She whispers loudly. I stop, but don't turn around. Yeah? Nothing. And if you haven't seen American Psycho, I thought this was very, very good when I read it. This scene is adapted verbatim, but created for Patrick Bateman's character in American Psycho, which really tickled my fancy as well. I thought it was absolutely great. And as I started reading it, I was like, wait a second, where have I heard this one before? Oh my gosh! And it's one of my favorite scenes from American Psycho. It's so funny. But yeah, I know this has been a lot of rambling so far, very stream of conscious, and I don't have that many notes, but I guess just to make it a little concise and try to narrow things down a little bit, I'd say overall I liked the novel a lot, and I really like Bret Easton Ellis as a writer. And although it's not one of my favorite novels by him, it's still very good, even though how dark it gets. Let me actually, I know I just said I was gonna focus it down a little bit, but let me actually pull something up for you guys real quick. Here it is. Alright, so I forgot to mention another very important character, Julian. He's one of Clay's best friends since childhood. They've been friends since childhood, went to school together, whatnot. I believe he goes to school to USC, University of whatever. He goes to university as well, and he's befallen very hard times. He's another character that just gets completely and utterly annihilated throughout the novel, and Clay, it's almost like one of Clay's last like actual human connections that he has, because he has no connection to his girlfriend Blair. Towards the end of the novel, they have a dinner. They have like a little lunch/dinner together, and she asks him, "Did you ever really love me?" And he says, "No, not really." And even though he's still trying to sort of pine for some connection there, it's too late. There's never going to be a connection between him and this girl Blair, who they have an on and off relationship for years at this point. But Julian, it's like his last hope for an actual connection, and Julian is so far gone, and Clay is so dissociated that he wouldn't even know how to search that deep in himself to find a meaningful connection. Julian becomes a heroin addict, coke addict, whatnot, and he ends up, this is pretty grimy, but he ends up prostituting himself for money, and he ends up having to owe a lot of money, or whatever the story is that he comes up with. The real story is that he owes a lot of money to dealers, and he asks Clay for a couple $1,000, and let me just read this off for you guys real quick. Next day, I stopped by Julian's house in Bel Air with the money in a green envelope. He's laying in his bed in a wet bathing suit watching MTV. Another very common occurrence is MTV in the background. Early 80s. Sets the tone a lot. Very great atmosphere again. It's dark in the room, the only light coming from the black and white images on the television. I brought the money, I tell him. Great, he says. I move over to his bed and put down the money. You don't have to count it, it's all there. Thanks, Clay. What's it all really for, Julian? Julian watches the video until it's over and then turns away and says, Why? Because that's a lot of money. Then why'd you give it to me? He asks, running his hand over his smooth tan chest. Okay? Because you're a friend? It comes out sounding like a question. I look down. Right, Julian says, his eyes going back to the television. Another video flashes on. Julian falls asleep. I leave. I want to point this out. Why did you give me this money? Because you're a friend. It's there's just no, like I said, there's no connection because they're just both so far gone and just completely burnt out through drugs, partying, trauma, intense trauma, and Julian to more of an extent. And I don't want to read anything from later in the novel. I don't really want to read anything verbatim from it. I'll describe it to you guys. It becomes darker and darker, as I mentioned before, as it goes along, and Clay, it comes time for Julian to pay Clay his money back, and he ends up going with Julian to his pimp, basically. It's this like creeper 30-year-old dude who's pimping out Julian to all these like rich Hollywood elite type guys, real estate type guys, and Clay's actually in the room. Clay gets paid to watch as something happens, and it's not actually even described. It's not described. Like I said, it's another instance where disappear here, he dissociates. Things unfold in front of him, and 5 hours pass, he says, and you don't really know what happens. And that's almost even worse than describing it. I mean, when you have an active imagination, especially, it's like something I really just don't want to think about. So he witnesses this all, takes it all in. Cut to next scene. Julian gets into a fight with his pimp, blah blah blah. And honestly, you don't really hear from Julian ever again throughout the rest of the novel. He just kind of disappears into the background, and it's just really, really dark. I mean, everyone that Clay has cared about is just completely gone, and it's to the point where L.A. in this, the L.A. in this novel, and I'm sure the L.A. in real life as well, let's be honest, is an extremely dark place. And going a bit further into the elites again, the Hollywood elites, he goes to this party with Blair and Trent, and like I alluded to earlier, there's another very grimy scene where there's a snuff film where 2 minors are brutalized in a very disgusting fashion, and Clay actually walks out halfway through, and the rest of the scene is described by another character that comes into the scene, and Clay once again dissociates and buries it in the back of his head. And as we're nearing to the end of the novel, he essentially reaches a breaking point in his whole psyche. He's completely, I'm going to say it again, he's completely annihilated, where he's hanging out with his dealer, Rip, who's another sort of creeper character who preys on a lot of people around Clay, preys on Clay himself. He's just a really weird guy, and he takes Clay to his hotel room, and he has a oh my gosh, it's just really, really grimy. He has a 12-year-old child tied up. Oh my god, I can't even describe it. I can't even get into it. It's just it's too disturbing to get into. But so it's definitely not for the faint of heart. Less Than Zero. It dives into some extremely, extremely dark depths, darker than you might imagine. It's very disarming. It completely disarms you. Especially the first half, where it's like, where's this going? And then you realize, like, my whole analysis here, as I mentioned, where it went, where it was going, where it went, the highway that it takes you down, the freeway that the reader is almost afraid to merge onto. Me, as the reader, is afraid to merge onto this freeway, but it is what it is. I merged in, and I guess now I'm getting off the freeway, and I'm very excited to spin the wheel again. I added a bunch of things to the wheel, and I'm going to have it at the end of this video, coming up very shortly. I believe that probably wraps up most of the things I have to say about Less Than Zero. I'd say my final thoughts is it was a good novel. I'm glad I read it, and I'm very excited to check out more of Bret Easton Ellis' stuff. I believe I have 3 books on the wheel, and so there's a high chance I'm probably going to get another one, or I might not get another one for the next 20 videos. We'll see. The next 100 videos, my 100th installment, and I'm going to hopefully get better as time goes on. As you can tell, this is a very cheap webcam. I bought at Target for 20 bucks, and I just didn't want to film on my phone anymore because I wanted to have the good audio for you guys, so nobody's suffering out there in the audience. But anyway, let's spin that wheel. Thanks for listening to me ramble for this long. Oh wait, psych, I almost forgot to mention the movie as well. There was a movie adaptation around the time it was written as well. I haven't seen it, so I don't really have any thoughts on it. from what I gather, from the little bit I've heard from Bret Easton Ellis himself and a few other people, is that it's not a very faithful adaptation, but it is, from what I've heard, it's a pretty good movie from around that time. I've heard it's pretty good, but I don't have any thoughts on it. Anyway, let's spin that wheel. Alright, folks, we're going to spin this bad boy. As you can see, I added a ton of stuff to the wheel. I'm going to full screen it right now, and let's spin this fucking thing. Are you ready, guys? Let's see. Let's see. Alright. I'm excited, guys. No. Yo! Confederacy of Dunces. No way. I've heard it's very funny. I'm very happy we got Confederacy of Dunces. I'm very excited to read this. I'm going to try to plow through it. We're going to see how that works out, but I'm going to go pick it off my shelf right now, and let's go get it. Alright, folks, we're back to the KINO phone recording. It's KINO. Alright, folks. We're going to be picking out Confederacy of Dunces right off the shelf to cap off this video. Where's it at? There it is. I see it right there. We're going to grab it right off the shelf. As you can see, folks, my shelf has been growing exponentially as time goes on. And here we have it, straight from thriftbooks.com, Confederacy of Dunces. Let's bring this back to the recording. Let's bring this back to the recording studio. Alright, folks. Here it is right here. Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Looks very good. Can't wait to jump into it. Anyway, this has been Aardvark's Lit Corner, and I'm very excited to jump into this. See you guys in the next video. Either if it's going to be a creepypasta retrospective or whatever. We're going to see. Maybe I'll finish this in 2 days. We'll find out real quick. Anyway, see you guys in the next video.